Subscribe, motherf***. It has been over a month since Jokowi stepped down as the Indonesian president. But after no longer sitting in the highest office of this nation, he remains the most influential person in Indonesian politics. Many regional leaders and politicians seeking legitimacy fly over to his hometown of Solo to meet with him. How did he turn himself from a seemingly harmless carpenter into one of the biggest political behemoths in the 21st century? How can he leave such a lasting impact on Indonesia, having the biggest volunteer organization across the country and still commanding the respect and the authority of structural statesmen? How did he do it? Let's explore Jokowi's rise to power from his humble beginnings to the end of his presidency and figure out how he was able to pull off his 4D master chess moves. Jokowi started off as a carpenter and businessman in Solo, Central Java. There, he became acquainted with former Special Forces General Luhut bin Sarpanjaitan, who was also a businessman. According to some sources, Jokowi was also deeply spiritual. He would often conduct Javanese pagan rituals that reflected his deep connection to his Javanese culture and philosophy. Going from spiritual advisor to advisor, many of them were convinced that Jokowi won the cosmic lottery and thought he'd make a good king, or president, or leader. This became one of his ways to consolidate power later on, using traditional rituals and beliefs that are popular to rule voters to consolidate power. Encouraged by his business partner Luhut, his personal spiritual gurus, and also his friends and family, Jokowi entered the struggle party and managed to successfully gain the position of mayor of Solo. As mayor, Jokowi was notoriously hands-on and would often indulge in direct public communication with the people of Solo, a strategy that would drive him to take a more and more populist stance. He learned that the Indonesian people only wanted a leader that was present, not a leader that is good. A leader that portrays themselves of the populace and small folk was just what Indonesia needed at the time. Jokowi's fortune changed when a game of schemes between Prabowo and Megawati caused him to end up running for governor of Jakarta in 2012 with Basuki Purnama or Ahok. Initially, Jokowi probably felt handicapped. The Struggle Party was a mid-tier party in Jakarta compared to the prosperous Justice Party, who ruled the urban religious population, and the Democratic Party, which at the time ruled the central government. Not only that, Jokowi's running mate Ahok was also of a Chinese Christian descent, a minority population in a predominantly Muslim Jakarta. So Jokowi began using populist tactics he learned from Solo in an effort to diffuse other candidates inside the race. He often met with people of Jakarta and interacted with them almost daily, going as far as to walk around barefooted in the harbor, make YouTube videos to appeal to younger voters, and even going down on the sewers himself in a highly publicized move. None other candidates in Jakarta actually did this, so Jokowi's populist antics were something new, vibrant, and fresh. He represented the everyday Joe in an Indonesia dominated by boring, yaptastic intellectual elites. This won him the adoration of the small folk, and he had beaten Fauzi Bowo, which at the time was the current incumbent Jakarta governor, who belongs to the ruling Democratic Party. It was a very impressive feat that he has managed to pull off by himself. Jokowi has managed to dominate the hearts and minds of Jakartans, and the story of his victory echoed throughout Indonesia, as many people wanted to know just who is this random nobody winning the governorship. He became a curiosity for most people to find out and discover, and his heavy media presence feed on to people's curiosity. And the more people found out about the guy, the more people like him. 2 years into his governorship, Jokowi used the humongous public support to launch a campaign to win himself the presidential ticket for the Struggle Party. Jokowi's MO at the time was that he will never say that he wants something done, so he lets other people give it to him instead. By using the massive support and demand against the Struggle Party to run him as president, Megawati had no choice but to choose Jokowi as the Struggle Party candidate in the 2014 presidential race. And back then in 2014, Jokowi ran against Prabowo Subianto. Jokowi's populist tactics were once again working against Prabowo's religious nationalist posturing that went out of fashion in the 1980s. This time around though, Jokowi focused his campaign on the internet, being the first Indonesian president to do so. Jokowi also tried closing the gap between him and younger voters by involving them in his campaigns and recognizing some issues such as bonus demography and overpopulation. By once again spamming populist tactics, Jokowi managed to nab the presidency and become the most powerful person in Indonesia. It also helps that at the time he had an outsider status and he wasn't a political elite, which helped him get elected by everyone who hated them. Jokowi done what was considered impossible in Indonesia, and many credited the Reformation for allowing a simple man like Jokowi to become president. But many were wrong. Jokowi was far from a simple man. He was basically Littlefinger from Game of Thrones.
Why do they call you Littlefinger?
Gak tahu.
And his game had just begun. Jokowi was first and foremost a developmentalist like Lee Kuan Yew from Singapore, Park Chung-hee from Korea, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt from America. Now let me explain to you what developmentalism is. It's a framework where the state plays a vital role in economic development and social progress. Developmentalist leaders often has a hands-on approach to governing and intervening in national issues, which could veer on authoritarianism at times. And Jokowi was keen to impose his developmentalist vision on Indonesia. He needed to dismantle some checks on executive power. Doing so would mean that he must have unobstructed power. And as a democratic leader, power was often scattered everywhere. Jokowi's first problem was survival. We need to remember that Jokowi is no political or business elite, so that means all the politicians and businessmen considered him an outsider. And even his own ministers don't even respect his ability to govern since he was considered too quote-unquote green. They don't want his hands on all the government projects or any sort of active governing. And Jokowi was also beset by conservative hardcore Muslims who hated him for some reason. Being an outsider, his only allies naturally would be outsiders too. The other major outsiders was Soeharto-era cadres and politicians who were ousted 15 years ago. Jokowi assembled a power base starting by replacing Wiranto and putting his friend Luhut in charge of the coordinating minister of politics, law, and security. And for 4 years into his presidency, Luhut became Jokowi's primary operator, or his man behind man, depending on which story you subscribe to. Jokowi closed the gap by playing the political patronage game. He appointed his personal friend Pratikno as the Secretariat Minister, an overpowered ministry at the right hands who became his primary source of brainpower. He also appointed Hadi Cahyanto, an Air Force general, as his commander of the Indonesian Armed Forces back in 2017. He also used Rizal Ramli to whip up the oligarchs. In that span of 4 years, Jokowi used his Soeharto cadres to consolidate more and more power, and he began to use coercion and incentives to bring the country's elites to heel, placing himself on the top of the country's ruling class. But his presidency is up and he needed to face that persistent chud Prabowo one more time. When Jokowi proceeded to mop the floor against Prabowo and secured a second term as president. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. This time, Jokowi was no longer considered an outsider. He was at the top of the elite chain, even though there are bigger ones on top like Megawati and Surya Paloh. His elite guards were all scary Soeharto-era grunts like Luhut. His coalition dominated the parliament majority, and through strategic appointments, he managed to hold control over the military and police force. Jokowi locked in. He begins by securing the majority in parliament by cementing a strategic alliance with Prabowo Subianto,
Menteri Pertahanan Bapak Prabowo Subianto,
his former adversary and sponsor, and his Gerindra party by appointing Prabowo as Minister of Defense to prevent him becoming an opposition again. Then he declares in the presidential palace that he has no more burden to spare and begins finally doing his job instead of politicking. He used all tools available to him to stimulate fast economic growth, increase investment, and deep deregulation. Jokowi uses the coalition-dominated parliament to neutralize the Anti-Corruption Commission, turning it from an independent body to a government agency as a tool to control corruption and to discipline unruly elites. He violently suppressed Islamist groups, which included extrajudicially sending them off planet a few times. And using his immense political power, Jokowi steamrolled the passing of his masterpiece, the Omnibus Law, to reduce labor protection, dismantle environmental safeguards, ease restriction on foreign investment, and expedite land acquisition by the government. Jokowi's extreme popularity was crucial in passing these laws and helped him get out of sticky political situations. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Jokowi managed to keep inflation low and increase social welfare and aid to more downtrodden places all over Indonesia. And most importantly, he began his legacy project, which was the construction of the new Indonesian capital of Nusantara, compounding its construction into the law of Indonesia so that it is illegal for future presidents to not continue the construction. But Jokowi needed to buy more time in office to get things running for this mega project. Jokowi, at this point, was a normal man who climbed the ranks to being a conqueror. The new capital would essentially make him an emperor. He angled different ways, from using proxies to push for a third term, something that his party, the Struggle Party, found absolutely abhorrent and toyed with the idea of delaying the elections. All efforts wasn't accepted by the public or garnered enough support and was finally blocked by Megawati, who feared he might have too much power at this point. Megawati made sure to subvert too much of Jokowi's authority and tried to discipline her cadre, but acted way too stuck up and privileged against Jokowi to the point of insulting the president directly in his face.
Padahal Pak Jokowi kalau nggak ada PDI Perjuangan juga, aduh, kasihan dah.
Jokowi knew Megawati wanted to replace him as soon as possible and flexed all of her power in the government. Jokowi knew he had only one chance to fight against Megawati, the political behemoth, and topple her control over Indonesia, and she was determined to be a threat to his legacy. Jokowi realized that he needed to begin bending institutions and breaking political norms in order to secure this legacy of his. And holy shit, the Jokowi popped off. Around the middle of 2023, Jokowi openly declared his support to one of the candidates, which, mind you, was Prabowo, something he did not spell out in order to root his detractors to support Ganjar instead. And Prabowo's proposal to have Jokowi's son Gibran to run as vice president would be incredibly beneficial to them both, as Prabowo experienced a surge of popularity, with Jokowi voters and Jokowi having influence over Indonesia long after his presidency. And Jokowi agreed. He used his brother-in-law, the head of the Constitutional Court, to pass a last-minute legal loophole regarding the minimum age of running as president, and Gibran became the running mate. This move sent shockwaves across Indonesia as the growing trend of dynastic politics escalated at an unprecedented scale, a national scale. Jokowi was set to cement his empire, and it was a win-or-lose game against Megawati. During this time, Jokowi was at the height of his power. Jokowi had control of almost all the state apparatus and was a renowned world leader, having hosted the G20. And using all of his powers, Jokowi marshaled all state resources and officials in support of Prabowo's campaign. He poured in social aid to voter-rich areas to garner support for Prabowo. And if the voters there did not accept his bread, he will give them the lash. Jokowi dished out police officers and anti-corruption investigators to intimidate local officials into supporting Prabowo. He also placed his second son, Kaisang Pangarep, as the chairman of the Indonesian Solidarity Party 2 days after his registration, mind you, an Indonesian Social Democratic Party, or a Jokowi cult, depending on who you ask. And at this point, Jokowi's popularity and stances came to a test. He had to use his power to also intimidate Megawati's officials who protested against the electoral unfairness. And he also had to fight his rival Anies inside the digital landscape. Winning every single battle he fought, Jokowi managed to place Prabowo as the president of Indonesia. Though to be fair, Prabowo also did his own stuff, so the credit isn't completely on Jokowi's hands, but he did play a huge role. And Jokowi's scheming did not stop there. He attempted to place Kaesang as a provincial candidate, only to lose a bidding war against the Constitutional Court, who ruled against him. But Jokowi was successful in his attempt at derailing Anies Baswedan, who could have definitely won another term in Jakarta as governor, and damaging electoral competitiveness in Indonesia as a result. And now, even though he's out of office and not part of any political parties, Jokowi has managed to have leverage over the Prabowo cabinet. Some ministers were actually Jokowi-era cadres. We could probably see Jokowi influencing policies and governing for potentially 10 years to come. His entire political game during the elections in 2023 and 2024 has turned him from a normal man, a conqueror, to a demigod, as private claims about Prabowo states that Jokowi is a force of nature, a man half-god who shouldn't be made an enemy of. And Jokowi has demonstrated nothing but extreme cunning, wit, ruthlessness, and cold-blooded detachment in his politicking, which contrasts his sweet, wholesome, and warm persona he puts into public. This man is literally Don Vito Corleone. In 10 years, Jokowi has managed to achieve what others needed to do in maybe 50 years or so. Jokowi's rise to power is intriguing because it highlights the dramatic transformation of a man from humble working-class origins to the country's highest office, who has made such an impact on Indonesia's trajectory, on how we conduct our economy, and how we view our democracy. The last time a working-class guy ruled Indonesia was Soeharto, mind you, and he too in some ways was similar to Jokowi in their developmentalist mindset and hands-on approach to politics. To his supporters, Jokowi is a case study of how democracy succeeded in Indonesia, while to his detractors, Jokowi is a case study of how flawed Indonesia's democracy is. But his story isn't just about democracy. His rise to power raises profound questions about the relationship between leadership, economic development, and democracy in a developing nation. How does a leader with such a strong economic agenda balance the risk to democratic institutions? Can a leader truly bring about lasting economic transformation without compromising the democratic foundations of governance? These are the questions that makes Jokowi's story so fascinating and complex. And it also gets me thinking whether it's possible to have economic growth and development without sacrificing democracy. Because that seems to be the trend in leaders trying to build economy. Just look at history. Park Chung-hee, a Korean dictator, once said that Korea is an Asian country. It is not ready for a democracy as long as their economy is in shambles, just to justify his dictatorial rule. Is it the same case with Indonesia though? But getting back to Jokowi, I think something we can extrapolate is how democracy can both work to both our advantage and against our favor. And if you think about it again, many dictators in history got to their position because they were elected. It's a case when both democracy works because the people everyone wants gets elected, and democracy doesn't work because they immediately backslided. The case with Jokowi is, I think he was wise enough to look into history and be like, I don't want to end up like Saddam Hussein, for example. Let's just be fair. Jokowi, at the height of his power, was technically a dictator. He controlled laws that criticizes or insults the government in media and social media, is empowered to be able to imprison people that does so, and has total control over the police force. But he decided to hang up all of that because he realized he didn't want to be hung on a public square as opposed to being hung on top of the class. But I think we all learned our lesson regarding populism, which is why Ganjar's populist rhetorics and gestures are often ignored by the public and at worst viewed with suspicion. It seems that even though the public loves Jokowi, they hate to create another one of him. In the end, Jokowi has managed to turn himself from a normal man to a demigod whom everyone desiring power looks to and pays respect to as well. His nod of approval is crucial to one's career in politics. If you think about it again, Jokowi has successfully made himself a monarch in a country where leaders are elected democratically, ensuring that he and his legacy will not be challenged for days to come. What do you guys think about Jokowi? What do you guys think about his rise to power? Let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe and join my Discord server. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Base Indonesian Show. Let me know if you guys want more analysis on rises to power. I'll see you in the next episode of the Base Indonesian Show. Bye-bye.
Subscribe to the Based Indonesian Show. Dijamin halal